Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. A few banks are having a bit of a bad morning, so I thought that we might lose some attendees to that breaking news. But there are quite a few of you here, which is great to see. I will keep this briefing very short. I won't ask for more than 15 minutes of your time because I think obviously if something piques your interest or you'd like to discuss this a bit further, then we can engage outside of this webinar. But thank you all for being here again. You'll see in front of you, if you can see my screen, that there is a little pop-up in the middle of your screen. Do look for that at the bottom of this webinar. That is where you can ask us questions and we will answer. My name is Chris Rogers. I am the CEO of Split Payments. We will get to what Split does in a little bit of detail a little further into this session, but that's not really the important part of this. The important thing is to cover off in simple terms what open banking is. So, all right, guys, I'm going to pick up the pace a little because I know webinars can be particularly boring, especially as I'm going to be doing all of the talking. I am joined by Stacey, a colleague here at Split, who will be monitoring the Q&A and will interrupt me if something is worth picking up on, if any questions are to do with what I'm discussing at that point. Guys, this image is really important because this is our local NAB branch in Lismore, and it's not very modern. Banking has faced challenges in an e-commerce world, in a digital economy. How does it keep up with card transactions in a subscription age? And that's something we want to speak to because open banking is solving some of those problems as well. If you consider our subscription society today, I don't think Netflix would be very popular if we had to go to our local bank branch to sign a direct debit agreement in order to access Peaky Blinders via Netflix. If you haven't watched that series, I'm halfway through it and it's addictive. So I want to also speak a little today about what real-time payments is to the banking world and what the digital economy looks like with the banking lens as well. There's really just three things I want to tackle today. What is open banking in layman's terms? Why is it important to us, in our everyday lives with everything we do on a daily basis? And is there a bigger angle here? Because the conversation around open banking has been limited to date. Why are we not talking about it? And what's going to happen in 2020 in Australia with open banking? And what does that mean? So if we can cover off on those things in the next 10 minutes, then I think we are winning. So just a reminder, because there's a few more people dialing in late, please do use the Q&A launcher at the bottom of your webinar session to ask me anything you would like, so long as it's to do with open banking. I will not take questions on Brian Hartzer at this point. Well, no, why not? Okay. So I guess let's tackle what open banking is. It's really not that complicated. What it is empowering customers to share their data with other people so they can obtain a better financial outcome. So just, think about that for a second. It's just sharing our data so we can get a better financial service, or I would argue, because I'm an ideologist, a better social outcome as well. And I think open banking does in part speak to the unbankable and creating a better financial inclusion, not just in a mature economy like Australia, but globally as well. So if you want to pick up on that angle, do use the Q&A to ask me more about the social ramifications of something like open banking. But I will come back to that picture we kicked off with, because if you look closely, that's Mabel at the top right. She is in fact handing over 3 months of her transaction, her banking statements to this bank teller so she can get a better loan. What point am I trying to make with that? I'm saying that open banking is nothing new. In fact, we've been sharing transactional data for a very, very long time if we are compelled to get a better financial outcome. So what is it about open banking that's relevant now? So I guess I want to highlight two things that we see a lot at Split. And I don't know if everyone on the line today is specifically a journalist around financial services, but payments is going through radical change right now. The biggest change in decades in terms of how bank transfer technology is pivoting, how big banks are being made to share data. So it's a lot of change happening right now, which is really exciting. But let's try and put a human lens onto that, because I am, after all, a geek. So it's exciting for me. What will resonate with the Australian public? So let's try and extrapolate that out of this session as well. But there are two trends happening globally, and it's worth just taking a few moments to do this. And guys, if I'm going too fast, do let us know through the Q&A. Tell me to slow down, but I think, you being journalists, I'm sure the pace is okay. There are two things happening today that are seismic. One is open banking, which is what this session is about. The second is real-time payments. So RTP schemes are big news in financial services, and that is the ability to move money in seconds. It's exciting because that's a consumer expectation, right? You want to be able to move money in seconds to your mates to cover a restaurant bill, of course. But the other thing it does is it essentially speeds up fraud. So in light of this money and the money laundering fiasco that's kicking off today, the investigation Austrac are making, real-time payments does shine a light on real-time fraud. And we do well to cover off on that and how something like open banking is mitigating that risk as well. But Split earlier this year dove deep into real-time payments across the globe. And you might be interested to see that by the end of 2020, there will be 61 countries across the globe with an RTP scheme. And so that's prolific. And again, this is in-country RTP schemes. But I think you'll see a really big trend towards FX and moving money across into domestic RTP schemes, reinvigorating what money transfer looks like globally as well. The interesting thing, guys, that we did as well, at the same time as exploring RTP, or real-time payments across the globe, we looked at open banking, and we asked, which countries are ready for open banking? And by ready, I mean, have they got the regulation in place? Are they mandating it? Is there a consumer appetite for sharing data? And most importantly, is there a fintech ecosystem that can use this open banking reality to deliver better services? And if you have a look at the screen in front of you guys, the footprint is very comparable to RTP. So where there are real-time payment schemes, there is an open banking framework. And I think that's really important to sort of marry the two to better understand what that trend is doing. So is open banking new? No, not really. We've been doing it for a long time, sharing data to get a better financial outcome. That is, in my mind, as simple as open banking is. What is radically different today is that the real-time delivery is the game changer. And that's technology. Open banking is a tech movement. So if you Google open banking, you'll find it often related to the API connectivity that banks are making available to third parties, through which they can obtain data. So this is a tech revolution, not so much a data revolution. And again, if you want to pick me up on that, please do use the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions. And I think, Stacey, there's a few coming through, so we'll get to them. But Stacey, do interrupt me at any point if it's relevant to what I'm speaking about. And again, for those that have joined us, this is Chris Rogers from Split Payments. We are going to be very quick in this press briefing to get to the sort of core angles we think are of interest to the Australian people and what the key changes are as well. I will just take 2 minutes, if I may, to explain what Split do, because we're quite unique in that we use open banking, or the ability to obtain data, and we marry it up with the ability to initiate payments. And that's a really exciting space and a world-first space to be in. So we use this connectivity, so a customer-initiated connection to transactional data. We use it for origination. We can, achieve great data accuracy by having a customer associate themselves with a bank account. And very topical right now is it's also very good KYC and AML standards in how we obtain that data, and critically, how we associate a customer with that bank account. And that solves a lot of headaches that a few big banks are experiencing this morning as well. So I will speak to that a little at the end of the session. But what Split are able to deliver, and have a think about this because this is really cool, is that if we can tokenize that connectivity, right? So if a customer says, yes, here's my data, I want to share it with you so I get better financial outcomes, we can tokenize that. That's exactly what we do. So downstream, we can use that connectivity to do some pretty cool things around payments. So ask yourselves, guys, what is the pain point of payments, especially bank transfers? And picture your gym membership that you pay every fortnight, or your daycare bill that you pay weekly. Often, if there are insufficient funds in an account, there's going to dishonor. And a dishonor is an unhappy path for customers because they cop a fee from the bank, and it's an unhappy path for the merchants because they also cop a fee from their direct debit providers. So what we've done is we're using open banking to actually look into an account prior to attempting a payment to see if there are funds in there. And if there are funds, we can process a payment. And if there aren't, we pre-fail that payment so you can gain a better outcome by a merchant communicating, like the gym giving you a call and saying, please make sure there are funds. So that's very specific to what Split do. And I'm aware that's not really what this briefing is about, but obviously it would be remiss if we didn't explain how we are using open banking. And I'd like to think we're using it in a pretty innovative way. So, Stace, is there a question coming through? You're waving at me frantically.
Yes, hi, good morning all. We've got John Holmes asking, what is intelligent clearance?
What is intelligent clearance? So, okay, I was rushing through the bit about us. You'll see in the middle of the screen, everyone, there's consent management, real-time direct debit, and intelligent clearance. Those are our three core products that we deliver by using data to make payment initiation decisions. Intelligent clearance is we have unique insight into the banking rails. And for all of you banking journalists, you'll know that BEX, the clearing system, the way in which large organizations upload files is clunky at best and is not perfect. With this transactional data we now process, we have a look in and we know which banks use which exchange points in any given day. And we've built up a picture of how best to move money through the banking rails. I guess that's the simplest way to explain it, John. I hope I've done that justice. But the fact of the matter is, when you know which banks are going to check in their files, we're smart enough as a system and our machine learning to check in specific payments at the same time. So it's about moving money faster and better, but doing it through banking rails. And banking rails are the most trusted and secure way in which we can move money. So I guess what we're trying to do is make bank transfers behave like a card. We can do pre-auth on a bank account, right? So you can look in, see if there's available funds before we process. So that's pretty cool. Hopefully, John, that answers the question. So going back to open banking, just reset, if you will. I promise we're more than halfway through this briefing. And please, like John, do ask some questions. And Stacey, do interrupt me again, because I feel like this is the Chris show. But thinking about it in layman's terms, open banking, it's about data connectivity. And it's about using that data to make better decisions. But the thing a lot of people miss is that we are now in a real-time world. So this connectivity allows us to make decisions in seconds. And I guess as consumers, we're becoming more and more impatient. We want something and we want it now. We deserve cost savings. And I hope that open banking will deliver that. And there's another really important angle to this, guys, is to consider where we are today as an economy. We are well and truly in the middle of a gig economy, and that's changing fast. And the payments ecosystem has to change with it. We did some research, and I think the ABS identified that last year nearly 1/3 of the Australian workforce performed some form of freelance work. And that's not just Deliveroo drivers, right? Or Uber drivers. That's also Deloitte's consultants. A lot of the big four consulting firms now hire freelancers to do some of their specialist work. So at every level of the Australian economy, people are working in a gig fashion. And what does that mean? It basically means that you can no longer use payroll and pay slips to make lending decisions, because a very, very qualified Australian might make great money one week and nothing for a couple of weeks. So that's changing. And open banking, this overview of the entire transactional landscape for any particular person, allows you to make better decisions. We're doing some interesting work in the transport sector, and I like to highlight taxis as a great example of the gig economy. A taxi driver might choose to do 2 shifts on one day, to pay for a birthday party for a son the next morning. In this payments landscape, you cannot pay in real time. Real-time payment schemes and the ability for the driver to use open banking to onboard their bank account, we can make payments in real time the second that shift finishes. And I think That's a great social outcome in a gig economy, and that's a really good applicability of open banking and payments. So I guess in closing, I wanted to sort of pick up a few really nice angles, especially as we come into Christmas. I don't know about you, but I put up my tree this weekend. I think that's a bit too soon, but the family would argue otherwise. But it got me to thinking about ways in which people use open banking. And I guess as we come to Christmas, financial stress is amplified, and it's something that is on our mind more often. Is there such thing as ethical collections? And I want to tell you this morning that there's some collections companies doing some really cool things with open banking. So ethical collections, by that I mean, if you have a debt, and this particular company I'm thinking of has thousands of millennials that have a debt of some form, and rather than doing the fortnightly collections of an agreed amount, and if you default, you're in trouble, what they're saying is something different. Use open banking, establish a connection, and we will check your account every fortnight. And if you have a balance of X, we will take Y. So if you have a balance above 500, we'll deduct $50 towards your debt. And that's fair. That's basically saying to this debtor, this borrower, or someone that's in debt, don't worry, this is fair, this is ethical. You have a debt, but repay it on your terms. And in fact, tweak it when you want. Have a honeymoon. So long as that your payments are coming through on terms that suit us as well, then we're winning. And I think that's a really important way to frame open banking. The other thing to say about open banking, and another angle which is often in the press and we take a keen interest in, is the secret life of data. Really, the true custodian of data, the true success of sharing data will be down to trust. If I trust who I'm sharing my data with and that it's being shared securely, then we are winning. And that's really important. And for those of you that are across open banking, you will know that is part of a much bigger horizon event in Australia, which is the consumer data right. So banking was the first cab off the rank, to use the taxi example, but obviously this is going to bleed into telecommunications, utilities, and I think it will take some time before we have that consumer trust in sharing data. So this is early stages in the movement towards the sharing of data for better financial outcomes. So I guess, guys, that's all we wanted to share this morning, to sort of say that, think about open banking not as a revolution, because it's happened. It's been happening for some time. Think about it more as a technology revolution, in that tech is making open banking far more useful and in real time. And I think that's a really important thing to take away from here. That's really everything I wanted to say, but there are quite a few questions. Stacey, what I might ask you to do is just cherry pick 3 or 4. Because we've got quite a few members of the press that needed to get onto some breaking news. So I'll hand over to you to ask a few questions and we'll go from there, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, and thanks everyone for your questions. We have Sarah Adler. Love their ethical collections, but do you think people will trust open banking though?
Yeah, I think we have been in market for some time now with this capability. And I'll speak to that a bit in a moment, Sarah. But I guess you're right. It will take time for consumers to really, really trust and adopt this open banking capability. The UK have had open banking for several years, and it's only now coming into its own in terms of consumers realizing there's a value proposition. If I can answer you succinctly, I think consumers will trust it when a value proposition is in place. So I'm glad you'll have ethical collections, because you're right. If I'm in debt, you have a captive audience, right? I need to repay that debt. If you're offering me an opportunity to pay it on my terms, hell yes. I will connect with open banking. I will give you that enduring connectivity so that I get a fair repayment in place. So there are some verticals that are brilliant for open banking, i.e. lending, unsecured lending, collections, B2B supply chain is a vertical that we have a lot of volume in. But there are other verticals and areas in which I think the consumer still has a healthy dose of skepticism, and we have to do a job well as an industry to build that trust, that security and trust around the data connectivity. But a good question, Sarah. Thank you. Any others, Stacey?
Yep, we have Susan Nichols. Will open banking revitalise the fintech sector?
I didn't know the fintech sector needed revitalizing. I thought it was quite vital. But I think I know where you're coming from. If you look at investment appetite and funding rounds for fintechs over the past year, and the ongoing argument that Australian fintech deserves better support and investment. To be honest, though, I don't think open banking will open the floodgates of innovation, because those that are innovating in that area already have been for some time. I think open banking, and this might be a little controversial, is really just forcing the banks to toe the line and rethink themselves as custodians of data, and open up to a fairer level open market ecosystem of financial services. So we've been in market since January last year. We just use a different kind of access to the data. We use direct access through third parties such as Proviso and Basic and Ilion and Yodlee. But open banking, I guess, would almost legitimize that connection and allow the banks to control it as well, which is something they love to do. So will it revitalize fintech? No, but I think the game is there to be won by either the banks or the fintechs, or through collaboration to really deliver valuable products to the consumer. So the race is on, and as such, yes, I think it will revitalize. So thinking it through, yeah, the answer is yes. All right, in the interest of time, Stacey, any more questions?
Yeah, we just got maybe one or two more from Duncan. In the light of Westpac money laundering scandal, how does open banking address AML and CTF?
Well, I just knew there'd be a Westpac question. You're so predictable, Duncan. Look, I think open banking has got a lot of great measures and controls to counter AML, so anti-money laundering, and CTF, which is counter-terrorism funding. And obviously those two things are very much in the limelight now. Do remember open banking is a domestic solution right now, not a cross-border one. But what it does do beautifully is we establish a connection between an individual and an account. And we extract data, including PAN, so personal identifying data such as name, address, account numbers, BSBs. So by associating a person and or entity with an account, we tick a lot of AML and CTF boxes. So if only they'd be using this. I won't mention names, but look, I think it actually speaks strongly to the AML. KYC is another acronym. We love acronyms in this space, don't we? Know your customer. What we're doing of open banking really ticks all of those boxes. So hopefully more safeguards, more security, more controls, and more checks. Any others, Stacey?
Yep, I've just got a final one from John again. Thank you, John. Is our CDR the same as the European Union's General Data Protection Act?
Wow, now you're just testing my knowledge, John. More acronyms. I guess CDR, the Consumer Data Rights, is closely aligned with the GDPR, I think it is, the General Data Protection Regulation in Europe. There are some differences. So, John, you obviously deep dove into this. You'll know that the CDR was ratified in the Senate this August. So the consumer data right is upon us, and open banking is the first cab off the rank in terms of opening up those data connections. It's very similar to what's happening in Europe, and indeed we're leveraging that as a framework to an extent. A key difference, though, is that the GDPR had a delete me function, right? So a consumer was able to say, look, forget everything you know about me, please, Mr. Third Party. And the CDR did not cater for that. Labour have, I think, brought back some framework to allow consumers to delete them or please remove me functionality. So look, the short answer, John, is they're very comparable. And indeed, any open banking framework across the globe will look at existing frameworks to leverage best practice. And certainly that's what we're doing. Our friends across the ditch are developing an open banking framework in New Zealand. And we're regularly communicating about best practice and leverageability of each other's work. But a good question. Hopefully I did it justice. All right, guys, look, I think you'll see on the screen in front of you, there's an email address, media@. If you want to continue this discussion, I'm so happy to talk to this. We do like to think of ourselves as evangelists around open banking. If you wanted to find those angles and cover what the impact of open banking is to the Australian reader, or viewer, do include us, do use that email, and we can line up a continued discussion. So without any further ado, thank you so much, everybody, in a busy morning for financial services, for taking the time to listen. And hopefully we can continue this conversation offline, as they say. Have a great day, guys. And thanks again for taking the time. We're very grateful for it.